marriage is designed by God to be a place of intimacy, connection, and a grace builder. But let's be honest, sometimes it's also full of surprises, like realizing that something beautiful like sex that was meant to be enjoyed now hurts. And maybe you're just enduring it. Maybe you just had a baby when your body doesn't feel like your own anymore, or maybe painful sex has been a reality for you for years and you've been quietly wondering if this is just how it has to be. Either way, one thing is clear. This is not how it was meant to be, and you don't have to figure it out alone. Today, we're talking about painful sex, why it happens, how to talk to your husband about it, and what healing can look like for you. And to help us, I've got occupational therapist and owner of Pain-Free Intimacy, Jess Seitz. She's a pelvic floor expert who is going to walk us through this with so much wisdom, so much grace, and even, yes, a little humor, because if we can laugh about potty training disasters, we can at least try to bring some lightness to this conversation too. Am I right? So if you've been avoiding this conversation, don't know how to bring it up, don't know where to start, stick with us today because the gospel speaks into every part of our lives, including the ones we'd rather not talk about. So let's dive in.
Postpartum is hard. One second we feel like our bodies are miraculous, and the next we feel like we're a complete mess, out of touch with the strong, confident women we used to be, all while the fitness industry pressures us to bounce back as quickly as possible to a body that never looked like it was pregnant to begin with. That's why, whether we're 3 days postpartum or 3 years postpartum, we need the refreshing truth of gospel-focused fitness to give us energy for the physical challenges of motherhood, peace with our postpartum bodies, and kingdom-centered motivation to train for strength and stamina. So mama, whether you're sipping on cold coffee or folding 5-day-old laundry, I pray by listening every Monday, you become equipped, encouraged, and empowered for a strong motherhood, all for God's glory. This is the Strong After Birth podcast. Thanks for joining us.
All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. I am here with Jess Seitz. Jess, thanks so much for being on the show. I'm really excited to have you talk about the topic today because I think it's going to be really impactful for women who perhaps are struggling in an area of intimacy with their body and with their spouse that has not had a lot of life spoken into it. So I'm hoping that through this episode, they can have some life, perhaps freedom and lightness spoken into an area that kind of lives in the dark and more ways than one. So that being said, Jess, can you tell our audience a little bit about you, yourself? Who are you? Who do you help and how do you help them?
Yeah, thanks so much for making space for this really important and not talked about enough topic. I really do appreciate when space is given to talk about these things because we need to talk more about it. But yeah, so I'm Jess. I am a trauma-informed pelvic floor therapist and a vaginismus coach. So I help women who are experiencing painful or impossible sex. Stems from my journey of 8 years of painful and borderline impossible sex from vaginismus and the struggles that I went through with that my husband and I went through with that, and just really struggling to find healing in so many aspects. The physical healing, the emotional healing, the spiritual healing that came from that was hard. And so after trying a whole bunch of things that didn't work, finally kind of connecting in and doing some embodiment, mind-body work, and really targeting the nervous system to help with some of that inflammatory pain response that was happening, we were finally able to break free of it. And so that was 5 years ago. And now the Lord has put it upon me to now get to help women around the world to be able to get past the drama and the frustration of pain in the bedroom so that we can enjoy intimacy the beautiful way that God truly designed it to be.
That's so good. So it sounds like you had noticed the problem like with yourself and you were like, this is something that needs to get solved. You tried so many things. What are some of the things that you tried? I'm curious, like if one of our listeners is hearing this and she's like, yeah, I've tried everything. What are some of those things that you've tried that didn't work for you?
Oh, it's a laundry list. I tried pushing past the pain first and just like gritting and bearing it, kind of thinking, okay, well, just like anything else in life, once you just get over the hump or try harder, it'll get better, right? Wrong. It did not get better, got worse. When you push past pain, you just perpetuate the pain cycles. And that's exactly what I did. So I kept having pain, tried to see gynecologists, and I had a lot dismiss me initially and just kind of like, oh yeah, everything looks fine. Maybe it's all in your head. Drink some wine, try to relax. I had a couple doctors put me on things like amitriptyline or nortriptyline to help with like getting my body to relax more. That just made me feel weird and didn't really help. And I finally had a doctor after I think 4 years kind of mumble the word vaginismus. So then I had got a diagnosis, which vaginismus, for those who don't know, is an involuntary muscle response or contraction upon something kind of coming in. And that something that comes in can be different for different people. It can be a speculum, a tampon, a finger, a penis. For me, it was kind of all of the above. And so I finally got a diagnosis, which was like, great, okay, now fix me. So then I started like the more kind of formal treatments, I guess, of pelvic floor therapy, spent years in pelvic floor therapy. I went through dilators, which are kind of graduated cylindrical tubes, essentially, that help train your body to relax with penetration. I'd gotten through all of those to the largest size several times and couldn't transition to my husband. So that was frustrating because it's a lot of work. Pelvic floor therapy, although I was doing all my exercises and stretches and trying to do things, was not really helping. Also, sex was still painful, even though the exercises got easier. So then we tried couples counseling, which my counselor didn't really know what vaginismus was and kind of blamed my husband for my condition. Wasn't helpful. Then saw a sex therapist who told us to watch porn together so we could learn how to do this. They also said that maybe I wasn't attracted to my husband, or we weren't sexually compatible, which was really discouraging to hear. I reached out to pastors and elders at church who gave not so great advice and kind of told me I needed to figure it out so that my husband wouldn't turn to other things. It was a mess. I also tried creams. We saw specialists. I even went to like a soaking prayer event to try and get, deliverance healing from it. And that was humiliating and embarrassing also. So I feel like I'm trying to think. The only thing we didn't try that some people have is Botox, which there's not a lot of research to support that necessarily either. So basically, I'd say we tried almost everything and just didn't really get where we needed to. So yeah.
So for the listener who's saying that she's tried everything, now you've met the woman who's tried literally everything. Man, that's hard. And how beautiful is it that one of my favorite things to see a believer who is just living into their calling and redeeming the heck out of something that the enemy has just created so much darkness around. And so I think that there has been a lot of darkness around painful sex for women, especially in Christian circles. I think the worldly circles tend to humorize it and make it either they shouldn't. Tell me if you agree with this. Either they pivot it so far to make it humorous, so oh, you just need to laugh about it, it's just normal, or they take it the other direction and say, well, you just need to be a feminine woman and you need to be they take it very, very different direction. But I am curious, what are your thoughts on that, the world's perspective versus our perspective of vaginismus as believers?
It's interesting. There's a lot of different, it's hard to make generalizations. I've seen both sides go in both directions, both secular and faith-based directions. I will say it's hard to do research on vaginismus and know actual numbers, but it does seem like there are higher rates of vaginismus within Christian communities. And so, whereas I think the number is around 17% of women experience vaginismus or pain with sex in the real world, non-Christian sector, it's 23% amongst Christians. And so it is higher. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But, so Meghan Trainor, I'm trying to think, maybe 2 years ago, announced that she has vaginismus, which just kind of blew up the internet because it's wait, what? And watching the response of culture to that was very eye-opening. There was, that side of well, you just embrace your feminine energy and, just kind of like you said, women need to heal and women need access to better healthcare, which is true. And then there's the other side, which said a lot of terrible, terrible things about how lucky her husband was to be married to someone with the tight vagina. And I got to see oh my gosh. And then the church's response too, of what are we going to do about this? And there can be shame and there can be pressure put on by the church of well, we as women need to just perform for our husbands and to keep him from sinning. But then there's also the beauty of no, God designed intimacy to be a very connecting and pleasurable experience for both the man and the female in the bedroom. And so I would I don't know if this answers your question, but I think people are all over the place. And I do personally feel strongly that as a church, we need to do better. That I don't care what secular culture says about sexuality as much, but as a church, we need to have an answer for what do we do when a woman experiences pain in the bedroom, and we need to support her well. Both husband and wife, we need to support both of them well when bedroom time is not ideal.
Yeah, I think that's really good. So why is this not talked about? In your thoughts, what's your opinion on why you think it's not talked about as much in the church? Why is it kind of become a hush topic or uncomfortable to bring up?
Oh, layers and layers. I think a big one stems from shame with this. And there's purity culture layers in this. For a marriage, it's all about don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And then when you get married, it's like, okay, now it's all permissible. And I think sometimes we just assumed that once you get married, it's like magically wonderful. And you don't have to talk about it because you've saved yourself for marriage. And so it's going to be a great thing. And it just is this natural thing that progresses into this beautiful act that you've been waiting for. And I think that's maybe subliminal message that we get through the church and through purity culture. And so when you wait for your wedding night, if you did, and if you now are able to enjoy this, you feel like, well, I can't speak up because it should just be great. Like I did all the things and it's, it's supposed to be so great and beautiful and it's not for me. So I must be the problem. And so there's a layer of shame because as a church culture, we're saying this is how it's supposed to be in marriage, beautiful, it's husband and wife. But then when you experience brokenness in that, you feel like it's your fault. And so we don't speak up because I must be the problem. I must have messed up along the way. I must be broken. All things that I personally thought. I thought I missed the memo that I shouldn't get married. I thought that I was broken beyond repair. I thought I looked up what a eunuch was in the Bible to see if maybe that was me. And then am I a eunuch? I was disobedient to God by getting married when I should have been single. Like that's where my brain went. I went to that instead of to speaking up and talking and asking questions about it. I just internalized it was me. So there was shame that I was broken and I wasn't a part of this beautiful plan that God had designed for marriage that I'd heard so much about. And I do also think too, there is like this misinterpretation of that submission and the duty where like women feel like, okay, well, it's supposed to be painful for me, which we all hear the first time is going to be painful. There's layers to that too. I'll go ahead and say it's wrong. Sex should never be painful. It should always be comfortable at least. But so we believe that it's going to be painful. And so it's my duty to suck it up, get through this, submit to my husband. My body is his. And so I'm going to do the wifely duty to just endure the pain. So we don't speak up. We don't talk about it because it's just what I need to do. It's my self-sacrifice for him in this marriage and the way that I'm serving him by just dealing with the pain so that he can enjoy this. And that's also a lie, straight from the enemy. It's a lie. And then I think like maybe the third reason of why we don't talk about it is there's just that fear that we have of hurting maybe our spouse or disappointing him. Like I didn't want my husband to know. And I hid the pain as best as I could from him, which was hard, but I did not want him knowing that he was hurting me. I didn't want him feeling rejected. I wanted him to have that enjoyment, have that moment. And so I just didn't bring it up because I didn't want to avoid it or think that it was his problem at all. I just wanted to bear all that burden on myself. And eventually, I couldn't hide it anymore. It was bad. So
yeah, that's really helpful. And why then do you think the enemy, so you mentioned there's an aspect of this that is spiritual, and I totally agree. I think that body image and intimacy are both spiritual issues because they involve our bodies, and our bodies are objects of worship. Like they are not the object that we worship, but they are the object that we worship in. So why do you think that so many women are fighting the enemy in the dark on this? Like, why is the enemy wanting women to keep this quiet?
Well, I do think intimacy and connection in the bedroom is the enemy's backdoor into a marriage. I think it is the thing we don't talk about. So if we have problems, we're not going to bring it up to other believers often. So it's an area where I say often, the bedroom is anything that happens within intimacy is magnified. The highest of joys, those orgasms, that elation is magnified. We don't get something so beautiful outside the bedroom necessarily. And so the joy is magnified, but the pain and brokenness is also magnified. And so I think the enemy knows that. The back door into the marriage is the bedroom. And that's where, we're going to have our deepest fears come in. Our deepest vulnerabilities are going to be targeted. Our body shame issues when we're naked and exposed and vulnerable laying in bed are going to be elevated extremely. Self-doubt, the rejection, all of that is just magnified. And the enemy knows that. And then magnified, but we're not going to lean into community about it because it's not safe to talk about intimacy in community. And so I think the enemy knows it and he uses it, and we will suppress it, not talk about it, stuff it, and endure it for years. And it's just a slow grind in our marriages and in our own personal souls and our own spiritual walks. The resentment I had towards God for the pain I experienced in the bedroom was slow. And it was a slow leak that I wasn't realizing I was building this resentment up against God until it almost nearly broke our marriage and broke myself. And I look back and I'm like, man, Satan had a stronghold. I had no idea because I just didn't even, the bedroom time was bedroom time. And then, my spiritual time was this different spiritual time. And we just lock that door and close it, not realizing that back door is wide open.
It's really good. Yeah. And I think that slow grind is like so sneaky that you don't realize, like oftentimes, you see couples who divorce in their 50s and 60s. You're like, what happened? And it's like, sometimes, yes, those things do happen and it's really hard to see. And there are like drastic things that happen, but then there's also the thing that's been happening since they were married and that it just never was resolved. So I think that that's like so powerful. And I'm so proud of you for speaking that life into that area. That's just so cool. So as women have tried to maybe work through this, I know that one of the important steps for any type of healing is to talk about it, right? And is to have that conversation with your spouse. And so I'm curious, is that the first step for someone? And if so, what are some ways that someone could have this conversation with their spouse and talking and just bringing this into the light that like sex is painful and there's aspects that have been maybe brushed under the rug when it comes to enjoyment and presence in that time of intimacy?
I think you said brushed under the rug. And I think that's a really important piece because there's like almost two rugs here. There's your marriage rug that we've brushed this under, but then there's our own personal rug that we've brushed this under also. And so I think the first step in being able to comfortably talk about this in marriage is to lift up your own rug and look at it yourself. What have you been stuffing? Like I said, intimacy just exacerbates and magnifies the highs and the lows. And so the first step I would say is like really coming to term with what are you feeling, processing your emotions, understand what you're personally up against and feeling. Because if you just jump into this, like, I'm experiencing pain, I don't really like our time in the bedroom, and you don't know what's under there that you just unleash, it's going to fall on your marriage and him to help you process that, which is good. I think marriages can do that. But I would just encourage maybe sitting down, journaling, thinking, going for a walk and being like, how do I feel about intimacy and that pain? Why am I feeling so frustrated? Am I feeling abandoned? Am I feeling ashamed? Am I afraid? What are my fears around this? What are those big what ifs that I think that if I talk about pain with my husband, what are the fears that I have that are going to be there? And so coming to kind of terms with what you're feeling, what your fears are, and all of that before you maybe bring it up with him, I think would be a good first step. So you don't word vomit and explode and it ends up super messy. Because like I said, the enemy will take intimacy and magnify it. So let's get one step ahead. Let's start processing this personally. And then, okay, well, I do have shame. I do have fear. And so I want to communicate maybe these things to him first and work through that. And then we can deal with the more practical things or vice versa. And so then after you've undone your rug, then I would say, let's come together. And that might be a time where you intentionally sit down and be like, hey, like there's something I really would love to talk about that's really important in our marriage. Can we set a time, space to do that? I wouldn't necessarily do it after a failed bedroom attempt or after, you're in the height of intimacy time, just because, emotions are high. You might feel personally rejected or in pain or frustrated in that. So I wouldn't bring it up necessarily maybe in the bedroom, but hey, tomorrow afternoon, could we sit down and just talk about intimacy and how things are going so that you have a safe space to do that and you're not already wound up or feeling personally attacked in that moment or whatever. And then I think something that oftentimes we miss with intimacy is we think it's about the release, the climax, the orgasm, and the release and the performance that comes with it. And so if you can, at the very beginning of that conversation, change what the goal of intimacy is. And I talk with my clients, I say, we redefine sex as a time of connection and pleasure. That's it. Connection is just, did you come together and do you feel connected? And pleasure is, did you have fun and enjoy it? It doesn't mean there's an orgasm. It doesn't mean there's arousal even. It just means, was it fun and pleasurable and enjoyable for both of you? So those are the two goals of sex. So before you start your conversation about intimacy, I would say like, hey, I want to get on the same page about what is our goal for the bedroom and for intimacy time. I would encourage connection and pleasure. As you talk about this and you talk about, hey, I'm experiencing pain. Pain does not fit in with connection and pleasure. You're not connected because you're distracted by the physical sensations and the fear of that pain coming. And you're not experiencing pleasure because it hurts. And so pain does not fit into your new definition of sex and intimacy. And so having that definition to start can help with navigating that conversation as it goes so that you can be on the same page about what you're working towards.
Yeah. I like how you started to just take a couple steps back. I like how you started to like resolve what's underneath your rug before you have this conversation, because I am imagining, so I currently do not have sex with pain, but I've had it in the past. And it was odd because for me, I had it like first couple of years of marriage and then worked its way out. I think probably as I healed my own body image for me, and again, probably was a lot of that healing that came just naturally to my nervous system as, I became at peace with my body became at peace. And so I love how you talk about that of like, do the work that's needed to partner with the Holy Spirit on your end so that when you do show up to the conversation, you're showing up with that level of peace and that level of security, knowing that you're whole in Christ and looking for an aspect of healing in the body. And so I think that that's really good. Have you seen any common mistakes with this outside of maybe not having done the work before? What are some common mistakes or like things that someone would want to avoid as they're having this conversation? You mentioned like, don't have it in the bedroom during a time of intimacy, which that's like so spot on. But yeah, anything else comes to mind?
Well, a big mistake is avoiding the conversation. And don't get stuck on the first point where you're uncovering your own rug that you're like, okay, well, that's going to take me about 3 years. No, that takes like a day or two to just kind of like stop and think for yourself. So I'm not saying like you need to go do all this big healing work before you ever mention it to your husband. So don't avoid it. Like it's important when you're experiencing pain with something so vulnerable, it's important to invite him in and to start working towards healing. Because the more you avoid it, the more the enemy sits there, the more the pain pathways kind of solidify. So avoidance is a huge one. Don't avoid it. And then I think there's a healthy balance of being able to communicate our needs and what would help us to feel safe and seen and heard. But there's also recognizing him too. Like we are in this together. And a lot of times I think with men, there can be this big fear of rejection. And if we're experiencing subpar sex in the bedroom, they take that burden upon themselves, like they're not performing the right way. And there's a lot there to unpack. But I think in the ways that women versus men approach intimacy, a lot of times men tend to have it fall on their shoulders that they need to do something to perform better for us. And so recognize that that might be his fear. And I think a lot of times we just say what we are experiencing and it lands on him. And then we expect him to process that, which is true. Like, and he will have to process it. But I think if you can say something along the lines of, this is something I'm experiencing. It really has nothing to do with how you perform or how attracted I am to you, or because that's going to help dispel some of the fears that he might start leaning into. And so just build him up, I would say, in this conversation. Build yourself up, but build him up and build your marriage up as a team. Like, this is my pain that I'm experiencing, and I want to work together towards this. It is not something you're causing. It is not something that usually, now there could be sexual abuse, there could be things happening, but for the most part, it is not something that he is directly causing. It's important for him to know that this is a medical condition and not just an attraction condition is kind of deal. So those are probably the big things I see that might go wrong in this conversation.
It's really helpful. Let's shine a light on the other side of this conversation. So what are some things that can happen after having a conversation with your spouse about vaginismus? What would that benefit? How would someone feel after they've had this conversation?
Like, how would a woman feel about having this conversation?
Yeah. If it went well, meaning like they've had the conversation, it went well. That's a big asterisk there. It went well. What are they feeling on the other side of it? Or what's the benefit?
You might probably cry, I think. I think that's a huge release that the body does when we've been able to just share this hard experience that we've encountered with something so personal and vulnerable. I think most women cry, and I think that's beautiful. There's this release that our body does of feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling safe. And so if the conversation went well, I imagine that there's a big kind of like sigh of the whole body and what that looks like. And I want to just kind of prep and make space for that. Like, that's a beautiful thing to be able to have our body have that release and to feel like you're almost like melting into his arms and like trust. And that's the goal of intimacy, because that's connection and pleasure. If you can share this and it's met well, and you can have this emotional and physiological release of your body and just sink in that moment, that's just intimacy. And I think that's what we're working towards. And that's what the enemy's trying to keep us from. So I would expect, hopefully, for there to be a deeper level of connection, a deeper level of pleasure that happens. And for him to see you in an even deeper and more beautiful light. And I bet you if the conversation went well, and we're doing this through the lens of scripture, that level of compassion that he's going to have for you is going to completely be magnified, if you want to say. So I would hope that then he's going to do what he can to help support you in the bedroom, because you're a team in this. And now you've opened up that vulnerability. You've opened up space for him to come beside you even deeper. And my anticipation would be that that's going to lead to better connection, better pleasure, better teamwork, more vulnerability, and forward momentum. It's still going to be hard. Like, it's still hard to navigate difficult emotions and feelings in the bedroom, but it's going to be beautiful.
That's awesome. Yeah. A word that kept coming to mind for me as you were sharing that is just safety. Like, you can have that level of safety. And I think that there's no question in my mind why a marriage relationship is a reflection of our relationship with Christ, that you have that like safety in arms and safety and intimacy of being known. And I think that, that's just so rich for someone to be able to experience that. And that's so good. Awesome. So last question, I always like to end my interview questions with this because I think it's helpful for the woman who's like listening, but she might have a couple of reservations in her mind. What if somebody has tried to navigate this conversation and it did not go well? Like, let's say we'll flip the script. What would you give her as a piece of advice if it did not go according to plan?
First step, pray. Like really like come to the Lord and ask for his intervention in this and to opening up your husband's mind to seeing the truth that is here and the pain that's here. If it did not go well, I mean, we are two sinful people in a marriage relationship together, navigating something incredibly difficult and vulnerable. And so I would assume that maybe his own fears and his own insecurities probably took over, which is valid in the space of sex and intimacy. Like I said, a lot of times I find that husbands start to feel rejected and they start to feel like they messed up and it's their fault and they are supposed to be the protector and he's been painful, causing pain on her. And sometimes the response to that is shut down or anger or frustration or defensiveness. And so I think if you can take a step back and maybe try and see like, where is he coming from? Why did he respond that way? And then make space for that. And then come to the Lord in prayer and just ask for the Holy Spirit to open his heart and his eyes towards compassion. And then I would say like maybe give it a little bit of time and then try the conversation again. Now that he's had time to process it, do a little bit of active listening. I noticed that when we had this conversation last time, you really got quiet and shut down. And I think that intimacy is something we should always be striving towards healing in our marriage and really flourishing in. So what can we do to come together on the same page? How can I support you as you support me in growing in this? So, ask if you can revisit that conversation when you're both ready. And then there's always, you can seek counsel if you need to. This is a hard place to seek counsel. A lot of people have been hurt and burned by not wise counsel. And so I would just say really making sure that you are talking with someone that you really trust, who knows scripture well, and who's going to be compassionate and listen. It could be a good, solid Christian counselor. It could be an elder at church, but it is helpful when you can have, another person kind of look and speak into this space. And then I would just say like, continue to be in prayer for your marriage, especially with intimacy. I find that, we like to pray for our marriage, but when it comes to praying for the bedroom, we get a little shy about that. And the enemy knows that. So I would say intentionally every day, set a reminder on your phone or something to be praying for intimacy within your marriage and for hearts to be softened with that. And that's where we see the Holy Spirit oftentimes like really show up when we're dedicated in prayer.
That's so powerful. I believe prayer changes situations. I also believe that prayer changes hearts, and often that heart can be ours. And like having the patience and like knowing that we want to be doing something. They're like, we will like want to have that checklist. And so sometimes I feel like prayer can keep us in that place of I am taking action, I am seeking the Lord. It can kind of satisfy a little bit of that like performance driven aspect, I think, of women's innate personality. So I think that that's just really powerful and keeps us in a place of dependence on the Lord, that like he will work and he will move in his time, which is so good. Well, Jess, thank you so much for your time today, your words of wisdom, and your really, really practical insights. I hope that this is a good conversation to like really kickstart somebody's healing journey. If someone wants to take the next step and they want to get some advice and they want to get some professional help with their vaginismus or painful sex, how can they find you and what's the best way to reach you?
Yes, so you can go to my website, painfreeintimacy.com. I have a bunch of free resources and blog posts and stuff on there. I'm also on the socials at painfree.intimacy. Pretty good at responding on messages there, but there's a contact form on our website that you can reach out to. If you're interested in like doing bigger work, we do free consultations to learn more about our mind, body, sex reset, which is a holistic way of kind of working through the neurogenic pain that we often experience with sex and intimacy. And so those consults are free and they're fun. And we just chat for 30 to 45 minutes and talk about how we can get you past this.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jess, for your time. Guys, until next time, stay strong. All the love, Coach Laura.